Well, today's guest is Stephanie Miller, and Stephanie recently just wrote a book called Zero Waste Living, the 80/20 Way, the busy person's guide to a lighter footprint. Stephanie, thank you for joining the show and welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast.
Thanks, Sean. It's great to join you.
Well, I was reading, kind of scrolling on LinkedIn a couple months ago and came by your book post that you just pushed out. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting project. Let me see if I can reach out to Stephanie and see if we can't bring her on the show and talk about her book and learn more about it. But before we do, let me give the listeners a quick bio about you. Stephanie Miller has founded the Zero Waste in DC to focus on the application of zero waste strategies that have real and sustainable impacts with the goal of reaching as wide an audience as possible. And she provides advisory services to individual households as well as community and corporate presentations. Within her 25-year career at the International Finance Corporation, IFC, and the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, she served as the director of IFC's Climate Business Department, where she led global teams to find innovative solutions to climate change. So, I mean, you've been kind of in the weeds of this a bit for quite a while in a professional sense, globally. So that's kind of exciting. So maybe we'll learn a little more about your journey there. But tell us a little bit about, what made you publish your new book, and maybe a little bit about yourself and more about yourself and what made you write the book.
Sure. So for my entire adult life, I've been a busy person, like so many of us. And I didn't feel like I ever had the time to do what I thought was right at home in terms of the environment. So things like recycling carefully, being judicious about bringing single-use plastic into my life, buying products that were good for the environment. Composting wasn't even on the horizon. But I realized that I wanted to do more, but was frustrated that I couldn't. And I had these thoughts while I was actually leading climate change for the International Finance Corporation, where it was my job to help governments and private sector to get on a more sustainable path. And yet in my own life, I'd come home and realize I wasn't doing enough. And then a couple of years ago, I left the organization after the 25 intense years that I had there. I decided I'd give myself a gap year, spend a little more time with my son before he headed off to college.
Okay.
And finally had some time on my hands and decided I'd try to tackle what it is I could do to reduce my own carbon and waste footprint. And what I realized was that the obstacle I had was a bit this notion that I had to get to the zero in zero waste.
Right,
and that I could get quite far, that I could get, let's say, 80% there. And so I wrote the book because I wish that I could now talk to the busy person that I was a couple of years ago, and now talk to other busy people who think they don't have time, but hopefully point them in the right direction, where they can get a lot done, have a big impact with really very little effort.
Yeah, well, so it sounds like you were kind of had a little bit of a conviction, so to speak, with the job side of your profession, where you were really helping businesses come into a more sustainable approach to managing their business, and at home you just weren't really kind of living the walk, right, so to speak, and you were
exactly
you were convicted, sounds like.
Exactly.
You're like, it's like that old the proverb, don't do as I say, not as I do, type thing, and now you're like, well, I can't really say that. I want to kind of actually do it. And yeah,
I'm afraid that was me. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think we all kind of go through that journey, and, I think we're all kind of seeing little things that we can do in our daily life to, just make a little difference. And I think when I read your book, what struck me was, it just kind of started to snowball into a little bit more and a little bit more, and then I was like, wow, okay. So if we could do these little things and start implementing certain things in our life, then I think, then you could have this ripple effect. If everybody really had, a little bit of effort towards, you know, doing a more sustainable at home life, right?
Absolutely.
Well, so okay, in the book, you talked about how your experience with IFC and leading the climate business department in that area of green buildings, by promoting investments in more energy and water efficient buildings. But tell us what the journey was like, and the success and the challenges you faced in helping customers realize that implementing those sustainable designs and those strategies really helped out with the ROI. It was really worth the upfront investment to, see some bigger cost savings down the road. What was that like? And, maybe you could talk a little bit about that journey there, because I think that's kind of what you really liked it about your job, and it really motivated you to really kind of make changes at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the specific journey on the green buildings program that we built up in that organization, which was such a big success story, started off with just an idea,
Mm-hmm.
doing the numbers work and realizing what a huge impact buildings have in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. They account
Oh,
for about
yeah.
20% of greenhouse gas emissions and 40% of electricity. And the countries we were working with in the emerging markets, these are countries where the cities are growing, and therefore the built environment, as it's called,
Mm-hmm.
was really growing exponentially. So we saw an opportunity. I was able to hire a phenomenal architect who's still there, Prashant Kapoor, and we devised a tool that helped companies figure out what the easy things were that they could do,
Mm-hmm.
that would have the payback, the really quick payback, but yield a real efficiency in terms of energy and water use.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of it was to try to get new buildings to a place where they'd commit to being 20% more efficient than other buildings in the water use and energy use space.
Mm-hmm.
And that became the Green Buildings program. We called it EDGE, Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiency. And, the interesting thing is, it was not really the clients who were the obstacles to pushing this out. Like you see so many times, I was in a bureaucracy, a wonderful bureaucracy, but nonetheless a bureaucracy. And when you come up with a new idea, colleagues want to know that this is something that's not going to slow them down, that they can get the
Yeah.
deal through. And was green buildings and this program going to be something that stood in the way of, booking deals with our clients?
Right.
Um, so anyway, the really interesting thing was how many months it took for us to finally put our proposal in front of a client. And once we did, it took off, because I think clients were very quick to see if
The
they get
benefits,
these
huh?
upfront, paybacks, then it's a no-brainer. And the program is I think more than a $6 billion business for the organization now. So it's
Oh my
in the
goodness.
area of climate. It was definitely one of the success stories.
Wow. So what would be the it was so what that program is kind of similar to, like, say, a Leeds building design project, but not as extensive. Is that right? So because it was that a
Yeah.
barrier? Was Leeds a barrier, and then Edge was a little easier to achieve?
Well, LEED is the gold standard in a certain way, but it's also
Uh-huh.
not very accessible. And in the sense that the LEED certification is expensive,
Uh-huh.
it's kind of the first in a market would want to get LEED certified, the first five-star hotel, let's say, or the first major office building in a market. But for your more, for example, we were dealing with low-income housing developments. Those are not the kind of clients that are going to want to
Yeah,
pay tens of thousands of dollars to
makes
get all
sense.
the bells and whistles. And LEED is a wonderful program, but it does have a lot of bells and whistles attached to it. So you've got things like, if you install showers in the gym so that people can bike to work and then shower when they get there. Those are
Yeah.
the sorts of things that our emerging market clients, we didn't think those were as important as really getting at the root of the energy savings and the water savings and the embedded energy in building materials as well. So when you stripped away all the bells and whistles, we came up with a pretty simple Excel-based but powerful tool. That became a standard because clients felt like they wanted to know what they could do to be recognized for undergoing this program,
Yeah.
and so it took off
Oh,
as a result.
that is fantastic, and I love that you were able to make such a big difference through that program, and sees a lot of positive outcomes, and I can see the difference in the need for something like an edge versus a leads. Leads is more of like that new building design versus maybe a small, like you said, residential communities or something that's maybe already there. And it's a retrofit. So that's pretty good. Well, how did that experience shape your personal convictions to climate change? That we can do as individuals. I mean, what made you make that shift once you're like, man, we're making such a big difference, and now I want to do something, personally.
Yeah, well, once I left the organization, as I said, I really wanted to tackle the what I could do at home. I think what that reminded me of, that green buildings experience, was that climate change is complex and you've got to
Mhm.
break it down. You've got to keep it simple and accessible.
Right.
And so I think as I started going down my own path and I realized there were thousands of things out there, just like in a building, you can design in thousands of solutions, doesn't mean they all have the same impact.
Uh-huh.
And so I think I sort of took that idea of the need for simplicity, the need for pragmatism, and the need to not let the perfect get in the way of progress. I
Right,
would
right.
say those were the pieces that I took away from me from that experience as I was trying to do this on my own.
Oh, that's great. I mean, and you're right. I mean, the climate change. There's so many inputs into that equation, right? And you start everything's interconnected in some way. It seems like at least that's kind of my kind of observation. Um, so you mentioned in the book a funny little thing happened, and so let's talk about this funny little thing and what really happened there.
Yeah, so it's kind of silly, but I always thought I really bothered by all this plastic that I bring home. I used to go to the dry cleaners once or twice a week with my work clothes, suits, and I'd come home with all this plastic film. And I don't know why it took me quitting my job to do this thing that I'd been meaning to do, which was to go into the dry cleaner. So I did this the week after I quit my job, went into the dry cleaners, and I very timidly said, would you mind putting my clothes into my own garment bag instead of wrapping it up in this plastic? And turned out it was not a big deal at all. And that got me wondering, well, would the my local dry cleaner be willing to actually adopt a program where they make it easier for other customers to get these reusable garment
Yeah,
bags? And
right.
they did. It wasn't it didn't occur to them, but once I brought the idea up to them, they thought it was a no-brainer and they started doing it. And it took off. I helped them a little bit. I posted some signs in the neighborhood,
Uh-huh.
letting people know how much plastic from dry cleaners goes into landfills, and
Oh,
letting them know
yeah.
that this was an option. Yeah, so it took off. You walk into that dry cleaners today, even during COVID, and a third of the customers, they say, now use these reusable bags. So you walk in, you used to see a sea of plastic, and
Right.
now you see interspersed these green reusable garment bags and then the little bit of plastic in between. So it was really cool to see this idea take off so quickly.
Yeah, you're making a
Um,
difference. Yeah, it's like, well, this is a small little impact right there with your dry cleaner.
yeah, but it was so quick. So it was
Yeah.
great. And it made me wonder what else I could do.
Well, so that kind of spurred on, this idea, apparently that, well, maybe we ought to start writing a book about all this because you wanted to like really kind of dive into this climate change and zero waste and so tell us about, how you started the book.
Well, the book actually didn't come till later. It came up, it was a very unexpected project that emerged over the summer. A publisher asked me if I heard me speak on this topic and asked me if I'd be willing to write a book about it as part of this Resetting Our Future series, which is being written during the pandemic to try to plant some seeds for change that could take hold during and after the pandemic. But what happened after that dry cleaner incident, if you will, or initiative, is that a friend of mine formally introduced me to this idea of zero waste living.
Mm-hmm.
And I then understood that these things I wanted to do around reducing my carbon and waste footprint had a name. So zero waste living is very simply this movement to reduce your consumption and therefore reduce your waste. And it intersects with a lot of different movements, but for me, it was particularly appealing because it has this great intersection with environment and climate. And because
Uh-huh.
obviously, the less we consume, less we waste, the less production and therefore
Less
energy
greenhouse
used.
gas, right?
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. So it was cool to realize there was actually a whole movement around this that I could plug into.
And there was a connection between, doing something green, like, reusing bags to, just improving recycling to, so then you got a little deeper into that whole concept with the zero waste living approach. So you must have like read some books or something about it and probably got excited about, how can I really do that?
Yeah, I did a lot of research, and I come from an organization where you quantify everything. So I was really interested in finding the science behind it. I stumbled on a great book that was put together by some climate scientists called Drawdown, and
Uh-huh.
it lists 80 actions that can be taken by government, by private sector, and by individuals to reverse climate change, not
Uh-huh.
just mitigate. And I got really excited about that and then I did some more research and realized that if you looked at all the things that could be done and you scoured those opportunities for what exists, where is it that the individual can have the most impact? It
Uh-huh.
turns out that there are some really interesting things on that list that I hadn't really connected completely before that, with
Uh-huh.
being so much in the hands of the individual. So, for example, the number 3 thing on the list is reducing food waste. I had no idea food waste was that significant. And not only that, so I learned that food waste, if you actually ranked it um, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it would be third behind the US and China. So that really
Wow.
gave me
A lot.
pause, and I thought, oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. But even more interesting, and I learned this by talking to some food waste experts, that the food waste problem exists at many levels, of course, at the farm and in distribution and transportation and grocery stores and restaurants. But the single most important player in this food waste problem is actually the household.
Hmm.
And so that was interesting, and I realized that there were quite a few things on the list that fell in more of the domain of the household than any other player.
Okay, so you're getting into some of these real tangible things that individuals can do, and you realize that it's going to be a lot to really kind of individually try to accomplish. So you thought about this more of a more realistic approach of the 80-20 rule concept of zero waste living. So talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's something about the zero waste movement that is exciting and also daunting. And I think for busy people, it's quite daunting. I love the idea of, the DIY projects that you can do, and there are hundreds of them that are suggested. some ones that I incorporated in my life, like making my own household cleaner, but others there I just wasn't, even when I wasn't too busy,
Yeah.
I just wasn't going to do, like, make your own paper.
Right.
And so the idea of 80/20 is, it's interesting. Since I wrote the book, I realized about half of my community, half my friends have heard of this and the other half haven't. So I'll just say 80/20 is something we used to talk about all the time in my
Oh yeah.
workplace. The idea that you could really, not all actions are equal. And if you focused on about the 20% most impactful things, you could get about 80% of the result. And so where I used to work, we used to say, 80% of our business came from 20% of our clients. And
Right. Yeah.
I used to
That's
manage a
we say
large
that.
team, and
Yeah.
I'd say, I'm spending 80% of my time with 20% of my staff. But I realized this could have a really good application for what I was trying to do on zero waste.
Hmm.
And so it all kind of came together for me when I was looking through the actions that could be taken by individuals. And I realized if I sifted them for two factors, I could come up with a much more manageable list of actions, the 20%, if you will.
Hmm.
And the, the way I kind of distilled it, well, the two things I was sifting for were they had to be easy because we're all busy,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
had to be really impactful. And so
Okay.
when I looked at it from just that vantage point, easy and impactful, there were not so many things that could be done, and to know that you're having a really big impact. And I sort of landed on what I call my magic three.
The magic three, right? So let's get into that. The magic three. What are the magic three that somebody personally can control to make an impact at the individual level, so that the outcomes has the biggest impact, in your opinion?
Yeah, so in my opinion, these three things are what I call focus on food, purge plastics, and
Uh,
recycle right.
okay. All right.
And that's pretty much how I constructed the book around these three themes.
Okay.
And I present a total of 10 actions. That's it, just 10
Well,
that
yeah.
fall into these three themes that I am quite convinced if we were to all focus on these, it would make a huge difference.
Well, that's one of the things when I read the book that I liked. You kind of prefaced the topic. You kind of really kind of gave some context to why it's important, but then you gave some pretty practical action items that the individual could take. I mean, they're not the all end all be all of them, but they were really good. And so maybe we'd get into a few of these because I thought they were great. So you talk about, food is one, and then you talk about purge plastics and recycling. And those things, when you think about it, you're like, okay, I get recycling and I get maybe trying to not use plastics, but I'll bet you most people don't think about food as being the thing that can make one of the biggest impacts. So let's talk about, how does eating a more plant-based diet reduce greenhouse gas emissions that will eventually, or have some effect in climate change, positive effect?
Yeah. So I am not a vegetarian, but all my friends who are vegetarians have been telling me for some time, Stephanie, if you really want to make a difference, you should become a vegetarian. So this part was less of a surprise
You're
to
laying a little
me.
guilt on you there.
Yes, yes. My vegetarian friends are
Game
good
there.
are very good at that. But it is true. And, I looked at the data. It is almost 15%. Livestock accounts for 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's extremely significant. I think the issue, and if you come back to the 80/20 concept, is that realistically, a lot of people who are not vegetarian are not going to suddenly become vegetarian for climate reasons. I wish more people
Yeah.
did, and I would like to move. I am moving in that direction. So I now call myself a partial vegetarian.
Okay.
And I think it feels good to make the shift. It's healthier, of course. We've all read about that, but it feels good to make a substantial difference. And I'll just say on this point that, I grew up, and I'm embarrassed to say I raised my son to believe that, the dinner meal is a full meal if you've got several things on the table, but one of them is
I
some
mean,
form of animal protein.
sure.
I'm not proud of it, but that's how he was raised, and that's how I was raised. And
Yeah.
so to
Same
get
here.
to partial vegetarian has not been easy, but it's been fun because I've made it fun. And so one of the things I've been doing is to try to increase my repertoire of vegetarian meals. I like cooking. I don't have a lot of time now, but I've searched for recipes that are really good and that don't take a lot of time. And I post about them every week on my social media. By the way, anyone listening wants to join my vegetarian cook along, I'd be so thrilled. But I think with so many things, if you make it fun, and also if you don't announce that you're going to be serving vegetarian at the dinner tonight, then you can get away with quite a bit.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's my weekly goal.
yeah, and I think a lot of people, when people think about, hey, I want to go vegetarian, mostly a lot of meat-based, diet eaters. Their concern is like, well, it's not going to taste as good, right? I mean, that's kind of one of the big drawbacks to most people's thinking. Not, and I guess, I mean, I like a steak. I'm not going to say I don't, but I do like a lot more vegetables in my diet. And my oldest daughter, she's a all-out vegetarian. Although
Oh, good
I
for
think
her.
I think you might classify her more as a pescatarian because she does eat some fish occasionally,
Fair enough.
but mostly it's all vegetarian and fruits and vegetables, and she's in great shape. Um, and
That's
I
great.
do.
She's doing better than most of us.
Oh yeah, yeah, and she's been that way now. I want to say a good 5 years, 6 years now. I mean, she's really been just committed to it.
That's
And
great.
I've been increasing the diet of vegetables more and more. And I think what you talked about in that chapter that I liked was, what, take baby steps. Take little steps to kind of maximize or increase that level of vegetarian input into your diet instead of going cold turkey. And then maybe you get to a point where you just, hey, I like those vegetable dishes that you make or something like that, and you feel healthy, and you don't really think about, I don't have a piece of meat on the plate as much,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I
Well,
know I've had success when my son comes back from college and specifically asks for one of the dishes I tried to make over the last year. And he doesn't say that vegetarian dish. He says
he just
that
says,
fettuccine dish you made with the
right.
walnuts, that was really good.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, right. I mean, that if they taste good, I mean, I think that's the trick, right? But, well, okay, so there are some practical steps, and we talk a little bit about, maybe helping prioritize more of a diet-based, vegetarian-based diet in your daily activities. But one thing too that I read in the book that really struck me was the carbon intensity of the various food, and talk about the greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram of food that in the product chart, because I thought that was like, whoa,
Yeah.
kind of breaks down this whole concept of greenhouse gas. And basically, to me, it attached it really made the real kind of connection for me, going, okay, well, maybe if I do eat more vegetables, I can actually reduce the
Yeah.
greenhouse gas effect.
Yeah. No, it was really eye-opening. And I think one of the things I'm gonna try to give less this holiday to be more in line with what I'm preaching. But I'm gonna see if I can make a postcard of this this chart that shows greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram of food item, because it's so powerful. And yeah, and it's back to the all or nothing is not that helpful. It's not very practical. And here's a place where if you break it down, you can actually see not just that it's not all meat is bad and all vegetables are good, although that's pretty much true, but there's a big difference between beef and chicken and fish. And It's important to know that
Yeah.
you will make a difference tonight if you choose one over another. So, for example, I show a chart in the book that breaks it down. So 1 kilogram of beef, not surprisingly, that's the biggest culprit, beef, is it contributes to 60 kilograms of carbon emissions. So that's not great. You should, if you're going to have to, if you want your beef and your steak, I would say try to save it for a special occasion. That's what we try to do. Lamb is just under that, but quite significantly less. It's only 24 instead of 60 kilograms. And I won't go through the whole chart, but you get to chicken. Chicken is 10 times less than beef in terms of
Yeah.
the contribution to greenhouse gas. And half of chicken is wild caught salmon, only 3 kilograms of carbon emissions for every kilogram of fish. So you can quickly see you have a choice every night, every day, every meal
Right.
about what you eat, and it makes a huge difference.
So even if you still ate meat, but you ate, the less, of the impact for greenhouse gas, that meat instead, like chicken or fish, you're still making a huge difference in the emissions factor by not eating, say, beef.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I personally have a goal. I'm not saying everyone needs to have this goal, but if you sort of 80-20, my goal is to get dinners or the main meals where it becomes meat oriented. So my goal is to get to 3 to 4 vegetarian meals a week. Not easy, but, it's not like buy a Tesla or don't fly anymore. It's not that kind of decision. Will I have one more vegetarian meal a week? Takes a
Yeah.
little bit of planning, but it's not a huge hardship for most of us. So I find that kind of, achievable goal, if I put it in front of myself, I can, if I track it, I can make it happen.
Wow. I mean, you kind of look at this and you're like, yeah, we're talking climate warriors that are just, making an impact by eating better.
Yep, that's a big one. That's a big one.
Just
And
eat
in
better.
fact, if you go back to this concept of the 80 actions that could be taken to reverse climate change, a plant-rich diet, which doesn't necessarily mean becoming vegetarian, but a plant-rich diet is number 4 on that list of 80. So it's huge. It is truly significant. And of course, plant-based diet is mostly in the hands of the individual. It's not too much in the hands of government and private sector. It's all with us to make
Yeah,
those decisions.
right. Yeah, we can make that decision ourselves and decide what we want to eat. And but I did think that was a really telling, real true connection for the individual to make a difference. And just think, it's like if it's just you and I making that decision, and I mean, we got what, 100, 300 million people in the US. I mean, what if we all started to make just a little bit? You
Yeah,
can see that greenhouse, the ripple effect would take effect, right? Globally would
absolutely.
take an effect, So, and I think, the positives, you could live a healthier life by having more vegetables in your diet. So
I
there's
tell myself that
it's a
every
win-win.
vegetarian meal.
It's a win-win, right?
Yes, for
So
sure, for sure.
we still have to make the decision to make the right decision to eat, but what to eat, but still. Well, okay, so so we talked about the emissions situation, but are there other things that we can do around food waste? Because you talked about food waste being the number 3 issue of greenhouse gas. Talk about food waste, because how does that happen?
Yeah,
What's the impact? I mean, we could
yeah.
probably all think about it, but
So, of all the things that I stumbled on in these couple of years, the food waste issue was the biggest surprise for me. And we talked about already how significant it is in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, that it's number 3 on this list of things that could be done to reverse climate change, and how significant it is in terms of being able to be solved at the household level. But the thing about food waste is you've got to have some focus. And so, I said I only give 10 action steps in the whole book. 5 of them relate to food waste because it's so important.
Yeah.
And, I'll just say, gosh, you should never leave the house without making a list for what you're going to buy at the grocery store. Apparently, more than a third of Americans don't check what's in their fridge and their pantries before they go shopping. We just
Oh,
we're shopping for Thanksgiving, and thank goodness we did check, because we had, I would say, 20% of the ingredients we otherwise would have bought. So the first step is just to not bring things home that you don't need and that you're not going to eat. And we can talk more about Thanksgiving, because we'll be talking about the after effects of Thanksgiving when this is aired. And Thanksgiving is one of the biggest food waste issues in this country. So it's important to get it right. A friend of mine read my book and said, I love the way you make the fridge and your freezer strategic partners. And I don't actually use that phrasing, but I love that. So the thing that I think is so important is, once you do bring food into your home, you want to make sure to eat it or do something with it that isn't going to
yeah, don't
contribute.
waste it. Right.
Yeah.
You just waste your money.
So my thing that I do is called the 3-minute daily fridge review. And that, it sounds like a commitment, but it's really 2 to 3 minutes a day. Not a huge investment of time, but I swear it makes a huge difference in how much we are ending up throwing away at the end of the week. So for us, when I talk about this fridge review, the goal is to look in the fridge and see the things that are near their expiration. You made something a couple nights ago, maybe it's leftovers. You had it last night for leftovers. You're not going to have it again tonight. Well, that's where your freezer comes in. You can
Sure.
throw it in the freezer and it'll be a lovely meal in a few weeks. We put a label on the fridge on one of the shelves that says "Eat me first," and basically that's the signal to anyone else in the house that if they want to go for a snack or they need an extra meal, or that's where they should look first. And the other thing I really make a point of doing is to store everything in transparent containers. You don't have to go out and buy a whole bunch of new stuff. You could put it even in large empty jars, glass
Sure.
jars. But if you
Mhm.
can't see what's there, you know how it is. You open the
Yeah.
fridge, you push it aside, and then the next time you open it, there's mold on it. So getting it right at the at that stage before it goes bad is so important. And the freezer part comes in, and this was so fascinating to me. I had no idea how many things you could freeze. I didn't know you could freeze, besides ice cream, you can freeze all dairy products. They actually freeze really well. So we pretty much go through, I'm not a big dairy drinker, but others in this household are, and we go through the milk. But, if we've got a little bit of half and half left, you can freeze that. If you squeeze a lemon for a recipe and you don't need the other half, you can squeeze the rest and save the juice, and defrost it when you need it. So I think the use of the freezer has been a lifesaver for us in reducing our food waste. That's been really huge.
So when you did the research on the food waste, did you see that there was maybe regions of the world? I mean, like in Europe, I'm kind of thinking, and I've been to Europe a few times, and especially like in France. I mean, those guys, they're going to the farmers market like every day almost. They don't really buy a lot of food to store in their homes per se. They eat a lot
Yeah.
more fresher. They probably don't have the same challenges that maybe, I mean, sure they have some of the same challenges, but maybe not as big as we have here in the US. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So I would say the biggest difference is between developed and developing countries. Developing countries, they just don't waste as much food. They're more
Sure.
careful. Uh, they don't want to waste it. They don't want to spend money. There are figures on, I think it's $1,600. I don't want to give the wrong figure, but I think it's something like $1,600 a year. The average US family of four wastes in terms of groceries. Anyway, that doesn't happen in developing countries nearly as much as it happens in developed. You raise a really interesting point about Europe. I lived in Europe for 3 years as part of my job. I was in Paris. You can
Oh,
feel
lucky
sorry
you.
for me. It was, yes, it was not a hardship post, but it was, one of the most wonderful things is that I would not I did not waste a lot of food. I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but because I was shopping for our dinner every single day. I mean, the
Sure.
shops were right there, the markets, the farmers markets were right there. So definitely there is something to the frequency, so that you've always got sort of top of mind, well, this is what I'm making tonight, and you don't have a whole fridge full of other things you don't need.
That's one way to kind of control it, right? I mean, and then that way you're not wasting as much if you kind of do more of a daily or every other day purchase, and you kind of keep the cupboards a little thin, right?
Yeah, although I think that's really hard now with the pandemic, right? I mean,
Well, that's
more of us,
true. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
more and
true.
more of us are trying to avoid going to the grocery store as often.
Yeah.
So a recommendation I might have made, a year ago is not the same as I would make now, but it brings it, it makes it all the more important that you go and do your shopping. If you're now only doing it once a week or twice a week, that you do it with a list and you do it having reviewed what's already
Yeah.
in your home.
Yeah. Right. Well, okay. So I think we've done a pretty good job of hitting on the food side of this. So let's get a couple. Let's
Oh,
get to the. Oh, you got one more you want to hit
just
on real
one
quick?
more thing I have to say,
Yeah.
and I think you have a personal connection to this, so I really have to bring this up.
Okay.
Composting.
All
So
right.
once you're done with the food, now, even if you're really good, there's some food waste that is unavoidable.
Right.
And some of that food waste, a lot of it is compostable, almost all of it is compostable industrially, but a lot of it is compostable in your own backyard. If you have a backyard
Yeah.
that's big enough, I believe you have a master gardener in your home.
Yeah, my wife's
Um,
a master gardener, and I've
so I
built a real nice
mentioned,
compost bin here at the house. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and I mentioned in the book the concept of master gardener, because if you're not as lucky as we are, where I live in DC, we have so many options. I now compost in my own backyard, but that was intimidating at first. I used to use a service for $8 a week. They would come and pick up my vegetable and fruit scraps. Um, there's also in Washington, D.C., every single neighborhood, every single ward has a free compost drop-off site. But if you look across the United States, those kind of options don't exist everywhere. So one of the things I recommend in my book for people who don't have all those options is you can always consult with a master gardener. And I think your wife will know better, but I think they exist in almost every community.
Oh
And they're
yeah,
such a good source of information. Either they can take compost themselves or they know where composting can be done, from what I understand.
yeah. Every
So
every every state has a county extension office, and that's who kind of runs the master gardener programs. Yeah, so so people on the listeners here on the podcast, they may say, well, you know what, what am I going to do with all this compost, right? Because maybe they're not into gardening, and that's okay. And
yeah,
you can drop it off. But if you think, hey, maybe I should give this little gardening thing, composting, a go with it, highly recommend it, because it'll help improve your soil and help improve your vegetable and flower growth and plant growth, and just make a much more sustainable environment for your home and your plants. And it's a really good way to kind of manage that food waste. So
yeah. And that was one of the other surprises for me, was that when you put the food scraps in the compost bin instead of in your garbage, which ends up usually in the landfill, you're avoiding methane emissions. And methane is one of the most powerful greenhouse
greenhouse gases
gases,
is a
much more
whole nother,
powerful than
yeah,
carbon dioxide.
another
So
input. There's another
yeah, so
input,
I'm
right?
not a big gardener, but I'm doing it for that reason. And now, of course, I'm finding all sorts of uses for the compost.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but it's really important.
That's good. So I agree. So compost, folks, and she's got some good resources in there to talk about it, and certainly you guys can do an internet search on how to build a nice compost. I built one off of a YouTube video, and that's what I
Oh,
did. So it was pretty good. So, well, let's talk about purging plastics from daily use, and what it's like in everything we buy. I mean, it's ubiquitous, and so it's so hard not to go and purchase something that's got a single use plastic. So how do we stop that?
yeah. So plastics is, as you said, ubiquitous. It is made so easy for us to bring in. We are in such a convenience culture.
Right.
We don't just want our vegetables, we want our vegetables pre-chopped. When I was in my job, oh gosh, if I could get it in a bag already chopped, that was saving me time. And that was really all I thought I cared about at that time.
Right.
That's an example, but it's really all over. And so, unlike the food section where I have really specific suggestions, I have one suggestion with respect to growing awareness about the plastic, the single-use plastic in your life. Single-use plastic, by the way, just to be clear, plastic has all sorts of benefits in the medical field and other fields, but single-use plastic is that stuff that you touch for a few seconds or minutes, and then you get rid of it. Maybe you put it in your recycling bin, maybe you put it in your trash can. A lot of it ends up in the oceans, unfortunately.
Right.
So my suggestion is that you pick one thing. And what I mean by that is, my guess is that you can pretty quickly look at your own life and your own consumption patterns and figure out what's that one thing that you buy every day or every week that you get rid of pretty quickly. And for me, when I was in the workplace, it was water bottles. I was buying at least a couple a day, I'm embarrassed to say now. And so when I say pick one thing, pick the thing that you're consuming, make a commitment to find an
Right.
alternative to that
Yeah.
thing, and then promise yourself you're going to keep the commitment. So when I picked water bottles as my thing, I went out and got a cool, swell stainless steel water bottle. I brought it with me everywhere. If I forgot it, I'd let myself go thirsty so I wouldn't forget it the next day. And that was my thing.
Your
I have
punishment.
yeah, exactly, my punishment, but it's a good way to learn.
Right.
I have a friend who said, I'm never buying Starbucks in their disposable cups again, because, by the way, they look like cardboard, but they're lined with plastic. And even though many people think they're recyclable, only about 10% of municipal recycling facilities across the US can separate out that plastic from the cardboard. So
Oh, okay.
let's not kid ourselves. When we buy that Starbucks cup of coffee in a disposable mug, it's not actually being recycled most of the time. So anyway, whatever that thing is, my belief is that becomes a gateway to consciousness about all the single-use plastic that you're bringing into your life.
Right. Right.
And then
Yeah.
once you figure that out, gosh, then there are a lot of options for other things that you want to eliminate. You don't have to do 100%, but you can get to 80 pretty quickly.
Well, you talked in the book about, if we kind of rewind a minute, and the reason I'll bring this topic up or this comment up is, you talked about, like, in the EDGE programs, like, well, we only made the minimum requirement of 20%, but then you got people going in it, and they were like, well, man, we're really accomplishing like 60%, because they got motivated to see the results, and they kept looking for more opportunities. And that kind of, I think, that
Yeah.
applies here, where you start, like, with the one thing. Okay, it's water bottles, but then I mean, how many of us are, like, also taking our reusable shopping bags with us to go to the grocery store, instead of using those single use plastic bags from the grocery store, from Kroger or Walmart or wherever, right?
Yeah.
And those things aren't very good to recycle anyways.
Don't recycle them. If there's one thing, please take away from this podcast, you should never, ever put those plastic bags into the blue bin. They are recyclable, but not in municipal recycling facilities, where it actually clogs up the machinery. It can injure the workers. So yeah, that's an important
It was
thing.
funny thing. I was talking to my daughter the other night about the bags. And I said, well, let me grab all these bags, because we're not going to put them in the recycle bin. We're going to, we got to take them to Kroger or something. And she goes, oh yeah, Dad, I just learned about this at school. She's taking a sustainability class in college. And she's like, yeah, we learned you don't send those to the MRFs because it clogs them up. And I was like, yep, we just read a book about that.
That's great. That's great.
So
that's our future.
Right. Yeah. No, they're into it, and she's really into this sustainability aspect of some of the coursework she's taken. So,
that's so
we've
great
got good stuff to talk about, right?
Yes.
Well, okay. So, what are some of the recycling challenges in the U.S. and at home that you see?
Yeah, so recycling in the US is a problem. We were sending a lot of stuff to China. A couple
Right.
years ago, China stopped taking it. We have been hovering in the US at about a 34% recycling rate. Part of the problem is recycling is not available to everyone in the US, so that's definitely part of the problem. Another challenge is that you need demand for recycled products that use
Right.
recycled content.
We need
So
some industry in
please
there. Right.
look for those products, but there's not enough demand. Um, and a really, really big problem is labeling. There's no standardized labeling. And so, those triangles that
Mhm.
sometimes you'll see and they'll have a number in them.
Right.
A lot of people think that those are recycling codes. And in fact, I even have an annex in my book with those numbers and the
Right.
triangles, but they're not actually a recycling code. They're a message from one manufacturer to another of what plastic was used, what
Yeah.
compound of plastic was used to produce a given product. So we can use those numbers as kind of a cheat sheet, a proxy
Guide.
for
Yeah.
what works and what doesn't, but it's not 100%. It just just so your
Yeah.
audience knows, it's a guide, and that's all it
Right.
is.
Right. Right.
But it's
Well.
important to get the recycling part right. That's why it's the third of my magic three,
Mhm.
because obviously whatever you're recycling, if there's a reuse for that raw material, that virgin material, that means you're not contributing to more deforestation when you're recycling your cardboard and paper. Metals, you're not having to dig for the
Right.
mine for the metals, and
Metal
metals and
ore. Yeah.
glass are infinitely recyclable.
Sure.
That's not true for paper, and it's not true for plastic. They have shorter life spans in terms of recycling, but metals is a really good thing to recycle, and it's a good package to use because it is so there's such a good market for it in the
It's
US.
durable. Right. Yeah. It's reusable. Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that most individuals at home face is, understanding the proper way to recycle.
Yeah.
Isn't that the case where, people just like they're throwing stuff in the recycle bin and they're not washing things off. It's kind of cross contaminating. They may be just throwing stuff in there they think is recyclable. It's not. It seems to me one of the biggest opportunities that we as a nation could do is do a lot better job of educating the young people, old people, basically the society
Yeah.
on the proper ways of recycling.
Yeah. The recycling is a bit like property. It's a location. Recycling is a very local issue. I live in the District of Columbia. Across the street from me is Montgomery County, Maryland. We have different recycling rules.
Mhm.
So you're absolutely right. It's important to get it right. You don't have to get 100% right, but it's important to know those things that show up in your recycling bin every week that you buy every single week. It's important to know whether they belong there or they don't, because at minimum, it creates a lot of inefficiency in the system if you're throwing things in that don't belong there, and then they have to be sorted out.
Yeah.
But the worst part is, well, that example of the plastic bag,
Yeah.
plastic film of
Yeah.
any kind doesn't belong in the recycle bin, and it can cause worker injury. And then you've also got, you raised it, contamination. If you end up throwing something in there that's really dirty with food and it gets on other stuff that would have been recyclable and now no longer is recyclable, you're
Sure.
contributing then to the problem of us not being able to recycle everything that we should be able to. So it is really important to get it right. It's recycling is important on so many levels, but I recommend, it sounds a little boring, but doing a recycle audit. I actually think it's a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, check out what's in your recycle bin. And I think you achieve two things when you do that. One is, if you do it alongside your municipal rules for recycling, then you can quickly take out the things that don't belong, and then
Yeah.
let people know in your household, don't put this in here anymore.
Yeah, right.
But
No,
the second thing I think that is really cool about doing a recycling bin audit is that you start to think about, and this goes back to purging plastic, you start to think about the things that you could do to reduce your waste. So if you notice, for example, I did an audit for a neighbor of mine, she had a whole bunch of yogurt containers. Well, she didn't think she'd make yogurt, but the pandemic hit and she suddenly saw she had a lot of time on her hands. So she started making yogurt. Um, so when you see especially the plastic that's in your recycle bin, if you
yeah,
see there's some big categories of plastic that your family always uses, it can trigger you to think about what some good alternatives are.
yeah,
And so I think it's, as I said, most people might not agree that a recycle
yeah.
audit is a fun thing, but
Yeah, we do
there you
that.
go.
You know,
I'm a
we help.
recycling nerd.
Yeah, no, in my profession, we do a lot of dumpster diving for customers and clients, and we go in and we sort through, like, well, okay, guys, you need to do a better job of source segregating these waste streams to help improve your recycling rates. A lot of people, a lot of industry is really trying to go zero landfill.
Yeah,
Or zero waste, or just to improve their greenhouse gas footprint. So you got
that's
to do
great.
it, and you got to
Yeah.
do it, and when you do, you realize, geez, instead of having maybe two bags of trash that go out to the curb every week, you only have maybe one or less than one, because you've done a better job of recycling, and you have more recyclables that go out to the curb than you do trash. So it's
Absolutely. I mean, that's the biggest noticeable change for the people in this household that take out the garbage. My son and my fiance, you have to peer into the garbage bin now. It's not full at all since we started composting. And you have to
yeah,
really peer into the recycling bin too, because we've eliminated so many things. So
that's good.
it's nice to notice the difference, to be able to
Yeah.
see it.
Well, too, talking about education, I think we need a Schoolhouse Rock, video cartoon on recycling. Yeah, I think that would be good.
That's an
come up
awesome idea. Yeah,
come
well,
up with
that's my
something that.
generation.
Yeah, exactly. I think that'd be great. So, all right. Well, are there any other ways to affect change at your local communities before, kind of as we get winding down here? Anything else that you can do? I mean, we've kind of covered the top three things personally we can do, and some action items that are in the book. And we didn't cover all the action items, which is good because we want people to buy the book and read it. But anything else?
Yeah, so one of the most exciting things for me in doing this was to realize the power of social norms,
Mhm.
how important our behavior is in terms of sending signals to those around us. And I really didn't have an appreciation of this before, but your family, your friends, your community, they notice what you do. And so if you have social media, I have an Instagram and a Facebook and a LinkedIn account, post on there about things. If you get the bug for zero waste, let people know what you're doing, because when you do, they will start to feel like, maybe they should be doing that too.
Yeah.
I
Right.
won't go into it now, but there's some really good research on how impactful that is. And then the second thing I'll say is, just when you see the right kind of consumer-oriented businesses doing the right thing, support them. Your
Sure.
local farmers markets we were talking about before.
Hmm.
Now I go to them religiously. If you have a store that sells things in bulk, where you can bring your own cotton produce bag or jar and fill them, they may not exclusively do that, but if they have a big section on bulk, use them. Those are great. Those are stores that are trying to do the right thing. So
Yeah.
the power of the pocketbook and the consumer vote is a big one. And as you said, Sean, if we all did these things, it really would make a huge difference.
No, that's great. No, that's good. So, well, how do people get a hold of you and get in contact with you, and how, so they can buy this book?
Well, I'm at www.zerowastendc.com, and I've got links there to where you can get the book from independent bookstores, from Amazon, ebooks, and so forth. I should also say that the book is part of a series called Resetting Our Future, and Changemakers Books has a site There are several other climate-oriented books that are coming out in the same Resetting Our Future series. And that site is www.resettingourfuture.com. So I would recommend that to you. And you're welcome to follow me on Instagram. I would love if anyone wants to join me, as I said, in the vegetarian cook-along that I do every week. I also post a recycling tip of the week there. So yeah, the more the merrier.
This is good. Well, Stephanie, you're making a big difference in the zero waste living space, and I think a lot of people are going to get motivated to, start kind of living by their creed, so to speak. And I think that'll be good. I think a little bit helps. Every little bit helps, and people are going to read this book and get some great ideas. And thank you for writing it. It helped me, and I really enjoyed it. And you know what, people, too, it's not a very long read, so you can probably get it done in a weekend easily, take some practical steps and help reduce greenhouse gas and make a big difference in our society. So. Well, Stephanie, thanks for joining the show and coming on. And we'll put some links into your contact information on my website as well. And we'll try to hopefully get some people driving your way to purchase the book and get connected with you. So look forward to it.
Thanks so much, Sean. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is good. Thank you. And look forward to catching up soon.
Great.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.